What's up, night owls? Welcome back to Demon Sleep. Real quick, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I personally read every single one of them, and honestly, it makes my day seeing you all from around the world. If these dark tailies help you drift off or just escape reality for a bit, smash that like button and subscribe. But only if you think we've earned it. No pressure. Alright, lights off, rain on, blankets up. Let's dive into tonight's nightmare fuel. In 2019, a perfectly healthy 26-year-old man went to sleep and never woke up. There was no struggle, no noise, no sign of pain. But when his family checked the small camera beside his bed, they heard him whisper something at exactly 3:17 a.m. Three words that would later appear in dozens of other death cases. Three words that should have been impossible. I see you. And then silence. His name was Daniel Reyes. He lived alone on the third floor of a quiet apartment building in San Diego. He had no history of illness, no heart problems, no drugs, no alcohol. His medical records were clean. That night, Daniel followed his normal routine. He brushed his teeth, checked his phone, turned off the lights, and lay down in the dark. Nothing unusual, nothing strange, but the camera told a different story. At first, everything looked normal. Daniel slept peacefully on his side, his chest rising and falling slowly. The digital timestamp glowed faintly in the corner. 3:16 a.m. He hadn't moved for hours. Then, his eyes opened. Not slowly, not groggily. They snapped open, wide, terrified. But he didn't move his body. He just stared at something in the corner of the room, something the camera couldn't see. His breathing stopped, completely. For 11 seconds, he didn't inhale, didn't exhale, nothing. And then, his lips moved, barely. I see you. His voice was dry, weak, terrified, like he wasn't supposed to say it out loud. And then, his heart stopped, just like that. No convulsions, no warning. Dead. The official cause was ruled as sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome. Rare, unpredictable, unavoidable. Case closed. But Daniel wasn't the only one. Not even close. Because 3 weeks later, in a different city, another person died the exact same way. Same time, same camera, same whisper. I see you. And when investigators reviewed that footage closely, they noticed something that would haunt them forever. Because just before the victim spoke, they smiled. Not a normal smile, not a happy smile, but the kind of smile people make when they finally recognize something standing in the dark, something that had been watching them for a very long time. 21 days later, at exactly 3:17 a.m., it happened again. Different city, different person, same ending. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 31 years old, a nurse, healthy, active, the kind of person who ran 5 miles every morning and reminded everyone else to drink more water. She understood death. She saw it at the hospital all the time. But she never thought it would come for her like this. Alone, in the dark. Her apartment was small, quiet, orderly, nothing out of place. Her bed sat against the far wall, directly facing a tall mirror across the room. And like Daniel, Emily had something beside her bed. A camera. Not for paranoia. For sleep tracking. She'd been having nightmares for weeks. The same nightmare. Every night. She told her sister about it. Said she kept waking up feeling like someone was in the room, watching her, standing somewhere she couldn't see. Her sister told her it was stress, work exhaustion, nothing more. Emily wanted to believe that. She really did. But the footage told a different story. At 3:16 a.m., Emily was asleep, motionless, her breathing slow and steady. Then, her fingers twitched. Once, twice, her eyes opened, wide, instantly alert, not waking up, reacting. Her pupils shifted toward the foot of her bed, tracking something, following something, but there was nothing there. At least nothing visible. Her chest stopped moving. No breathing. No sound. And then, her lips parted. "I see you." The exact same words. The exact same tone. Dry. Weak. Terrified. But then, something changed. Something investigators didn't notice at first. Her eyes moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Away from the foot of the bed. Toward the mirror. She wasn't looking at the room anymore. She was looking at the reflection. Looking at something behind herself. Something the camera couldn't capture. And then, she smiled. Not with relief. Not with happiness. But with recognition. Like she finally understood something she wasn't supposed to understand. Her heart stopped 3 seconds later. Just stopped. No warning. No struggle. Dead. When her sister watched the footage, she collapsed. Because just before Emily spoke those words, the mirror changed. For less than a second. Barely visible. But long enough. Long enough to show that Emily's reflection was smiling before she was. And that's when investigators realized something that made their blood run cold. Whatever Emily saw, it wasn't in the room. It was standing behind her, waiting, and it had been there, long before she woke up. At first, investigators treated Daniel and Emily as coincidences. Two rare deaths, two tragic anomalies, nothing more. That's what they told the families. That's what they wrote in the reports. That's what helped them sleep at night. But then, the third video surfaced, and everything fell apart. It came from a man named Marcus Hill, 42 years old, accountant, married, 2 children. He lived over 2,000 miles away from Emily and Daniel. No connection, no shared history, no reason for his name to ever be spoken in the same sentence as theirs. Until the night he died. His wife found him at 6:30 in the morning. Cold, still, flat on his back, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She thought he was joking, pretending. She even laughed, until she touched his face, and felt nothing. No warmth, no life, just skin that had already begun to harden. Police arrived quickly. Routine questions, routine answers, routine conclusion. Another unexplained sleep death. But Marcus had something Daniel and Emily didn't. A full room security system. 2 cameras, different angles, both recording, both watching, both capturing something no one was prepared to see. At 3:17 a.m., Marcus was asleep, motionless, silent, and then both cameras glitched. Not a full shutdown, not static, just 1 second of distortion. 1 second where the image stretched, warped, like something passed too close to the lens. Then the image returned. Marcus was still there, still on his back, still breathing. But something was wrong. His chest was rising too fast, too sharp. Panic breathing. His fingers curled into the sheets, gripping them. Slowly, tightly, his eyes opened, and immediately filled with tears. Not confusion, not grogginess. Fear, pure, overwhelming fear. He wasn't looking at the door. He wasn't looking at the window. He was looking directly at the camera, directly into it, like he knew it was there, like he knew someone would watch this later. And his lips trembled. "I see you." But this time, he didn't stop there. His voice cracked, and he whispered something else. Something investigators didn't release to the public. Something his wife wasn't allowed to hear. 3 extra words. 3 words that changed everything. Because right after he said them, Marcus began to scream. Not loudly, not violently, but silently. His mouth stretched open in horror. His face frozen in a scream no one could hear. And then, his body lifted, just slightly, barely an inch off the mattress, like something underneath him was guising him. And then, the footage cut, completely. When the camera came back online 7 seconds later, Marcus was dead, flat, still, eyes open, but his face was no longer looking at the camera. It was looking beside it, at something standing right next to it. Something investigators couldn't see, but Marcus clearly could. And when they enhanced the audio, they realized Marcus's final 3 words weren't random. They were a warning, because what he actually said was, "I see you." Standing there, the moment investigators heard Marcus's final words, the room went silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Because every single person reviewing that footage felt the same thing at the exact same time. He wasn't talking to someone in the room. He was talking to something standing next to the camera, standing exactly where they were sitting, watching him, watching them. One of the investigators, a man with 15 years of homicide experience, replayed the clip again, and again, and again, each time hopping he had misunderstood, each time realizing he hadn't. Marcus Hill had made eye contact with something that shouldn't have been there. And worse, whatever he saw had been close enough to touch him. That's when they noticed something else, something buried under the audio. At first, it sounded like static, a faint distortion. But when they isolated the frequency and amplified it, they heard breathing. Not Marcus's breathing. Not the normal rise and fall of a sleeping man. This was different. Slow, wet, uneven, like air passing through something that wasn't used to breathing. And it was coming from right beside the camera, the exact spot Marcus was staring at. The exact spot, he said. Standing there, one of the technicians immediately pulled off his headphones. He refused to listen again. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over. It was in the room. He said it like he was trying to convince himself it wasn't true. But deep down, he knew it was. They checked the camera logs. No signs of tampering. No intrusions. No malfunctions. Nothing. The camera had been recording normally the entire night. Which meant, whatever made that sound, whatever Marcus saw, it had been physically present, inside the bedroom, standing next to him while he slept, watching him, waiting. But the worst part wasn't the breathing. It was the timing, because that sound didn't start at 3:17 a.m. It started earlier, much earlier, at 2:43 a.m., 34 minutes before Marcus woke up. 34 minutes where something stood beside his bed, doing nothing, just breathing, just watching, just waiting for him to open his eyes. Investigators checked the rest of the footage, hopping for an explanation, hopping for anything. And that's when they saw it. At exactly 3:16 a.m., Marcus's body reacted. Not violently, not suddenly, but subtly. His hand moved, reaching out, slowly, carefully, like he felt someone standing beside him, like he felt their presence in the dark. His fingers stretched toward empty air and stopped, hovering just inches away from something invisible. And then his hand dropped instantly, like something had grabbed it. The breathing beside the camera stopped completely, and 1 second later, Marcus opened his eyes, because whatever had been standing there had just touched him. After Marcus Hill, the investigators did something unusual. They stopped filing the deaths as normal cases. Not publicly, not officially, but internally everything changed. Because Marcus, Daniel, and Emily were no longer being treated as coincidences. They were being treated as a pattern. And patterns meant one thing. There were more, much more. The team began digging through old records. Not just recent deaths, but years, decades, looking for anything similar. At first, they found nothing. Then one of the analysts noticed a phrase buried deep inside a 2008 coroner's note. 3 words: "I see you." The victim was a 19-year-old college student named Kevin Morales. He had died in his dorm room. No illness, no cause, just like the others. But his roommate had told police something strange. The night Kevin died, he had woken up suddenly, sat upright in bed, and whispered those exact words: "I see you." At the time, no one cared. They assumed he was dreaming, sleep-talking, nothing more. But now, it meant everything. Investigators pulled the full report. And that's when things became impossible to ignore. Because Kevin hadn't just whispered those words. He had been staring at something. Something standing in the corner of the room. His roommate had asked him what was wrong. Kevin didn't answer. He just kept staring, frozen, terrified. And then he lay back down, still staring at the corner, still watching something that wasn't there. He died less than a minute later. But that wasn't the part that made investigators feel sick. It was what happened after, because his roommate had stayed awake, too scared to sleep, too scared to move. He kept looking at the same corner Kevin had been staring at, seeing nothing, hearing nothing, until, at exactly 3:17 a.m., he heard breathing. Not his own, not Kevin's, something else. Slow, wet, uneven, coming from the exact same corner. He ran out of the room. He never went back. He transferred schools 2 weeks later and refused to ever speak about it again. Investigators tried contacting him, tried asking what he heard, what he saw, but he refused every interview. He gave only one statement, one sentence, before hanging up the phone. He said, "It wasn't there when Kevin fell asleep." Pause, silence. Then he whispered something else. something that made the investigator's hand start shaking. He said, "It was already there when I woke up." For weeks, investigators believed one horrifying truth. Everyone who saw it died. No exceptions. No survivors. Until they found her. Her name was Laura Finch, and she wasn't supposed to be alive. Her case was buried in a hospital archive from 2015, misfiled, forgotten, ignored. At first glance, it looked like another unexplained sleep death. Female, age 28, found unresponsive in bed at 3:17 a.m. But one word in the report changed everything. Survived. Laura Finch had woken up. Laura Finch had seen something. And Laura Finch had lived. When investigators first contacted her, she refused to talk. She hung up immediately, blocked the number, ignored emails, until they sent her one question. Just 4 words. "Did it touch you?" She replied 3 minutes later. One sentence. "Yes." And then she agreed to meet. The interview took place in a small, dim room at the edge of a medical facility. Laura looked older than 28, pale, exhausted, like someone who hadn't truly rested in years. Her hands trembled constantly. Her eyes kept drifting toward the corners of the room, watching, checking, making sure nothing was standing there. She told them everything. It started with the dreams. Always the same. She'd wake up in her bedroom, unable to move, unable to breathe, and there would be someone standing beside her bed. Not a person, not exactly. It looked human, but wrong. Too tall, too still. And its face, she couldn't see its face, because it didn't have one. Just empty darkness where a face should be. Watching her, waiting. She tried to scream. She couldn't. Tried to move. Nothing. And then it leaned closer, closer to her face, until she could feel it breathing. Cold, wet, rotten. She said that was the moment she knew something that terrified her more than anything else. It wasn't there to hurt her. It was there to watch her realize it existed. The investigators asked her the most important question. What happened at 3:17 a.m.? Laura's lips began to shake. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She said that night, she woke up for real. Not in a dream. Not in sleep paralysis. She could move. She could breathe. And it was still there, standing beside her bed, exactly like in the dreams, exactly the same, watching her. She said she didn't know why, but she spoke. She whispered the words, "I see you." The thing didn't react, didn't move, didn't breathe. It just stood there. And then it reached out, slowly, carefully, and touched her arm. Laura stopped talking. Her breathing became uneven. Tears filled her eyes. The investigators leaned closer. What happened next? Laura looked directly at them, her face pale, her eyes wide with something deeper than fear. And she whispered. It smiled. When Laura said that word, smiled, the room temperature seemed to drop. Not literally, but psychologically. The investigators felt it, that creeping sensation crawling up the spine. Because Laura had already told them the thing didn't have a face. So how could it smile? They didn't interrupt. They didn't want to. Because Laura was shaking now, her fingers digging into her sleeves, her breathing shallow, unsteady, She slowly rolled up the fabric covering her right arm. And that's when they saw it. A mark, faded, but still there. 5 long, thin lines, curving slightly, like fingers, not bruises, not scars, something else. The skin inside those marks looked wrong, discolored, gray, almost translucent, like that part of her arm didn't belong to her anymore. One of the investigators asked the obvious question. What caused that? Laura didn't answer immediately. She just stared at the mark, like she hated it, like she wished she could cut it off. Finally, she whispered, "It did." She explained that when the thing touched her, it wasn't solid, not fully. It felt cold, but also soft, like pressing against wet cloth. And when its fingers wrapped around her arm, she felt something moving under her skin. Not pain, movement, like something was pushing deeper, trying to get inside. She tried to pull away. She couldn't. Her body wouldn't respond. She was completely frozen, forced to feel it, forced to watch it. She said that was when she realized the worst part. It wasn't attacking her. It was choosing her. She whispered, "I see you." And for the first time, it reacted. Its head tilted, slowly, curiously, like it was surprised she could see it, like she had done something no one else had ever done before. And then she felt its fingers tighten, not hard, not violent, but deliberate, intentional. And suddenly, she wasn't in her bedroom anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere dark, endless, cold. She couldn't see walls, couldn't see a floor, just blackness. And in that darkness, she wasn't alone. There were others, shapes, human shapes, standing, not moving, not speaking, just standing there in the dark, watching her. Dozens of them, maybe more, all silent, all still, all facing the same direction, facing something behind her. Laura said she was too afraid to turn around, too afraid to see what they were looking at. But she could feel it, standing there, closer than anything had ever been before, breathing, waiting. And then she woke up, back in her bed, gasping, alone. The thing was gone, but the mark remained. Investigators asked her the question that terrified them the most. "Why do you think you survived?" Laura didn't hesitate. She answered immediately, in a broken whisper, "I don't think I did." And then she said something that made one of the investigators refuse to continue the interview. She said, "I think it's still here." The investigator sitting across from Laura forced a smile. A fake one, the kind people use when they don't want to show fear. "You mean psychologically," he said, "like trauma?" Laura didn't smile back. She didn't blink. She just stared at him and slowly shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I mean it never left my room." Silence, heavy, oppressive. No one in that interview room moved. No one even breathed, because deep down, they knew she wasn't joking. Laura explained that after the night it touched her, everything changed. Not immediately, not all at once. At first it was small things, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away. She'd wake up with the feeling that someone had been sitting on the edge of her bed. The mattress slightly dipped, the blankets slightly pulled. But when she opened her eyes, Nothing was there. She told herself it was her imagination, her mind trying to cope, until the sound started. Every night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., breathing right beside her ear. Slow, wet, uneven. She would lie there frozen, too afraid to move, too afraid to open her eyes, because she already knew what she would see. Or worse, what she wouldn't see. Sometimes it moved. She could hear it walking. Soft, careful footsteps across her bedroom floor, circling her bed, watching her, waiting. The investigators asked her why she never recorded it, why she never set up a camera. Laura's answer came instantly. I did. She reached into her bag with shaking hands and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hesitated over the screen, like she didn't want to show them, like she knew once they saw it, they wouldn't be able to forget. Finally, she pressed play. The video was dark, grainy, timestamp glowing faintly. 3:16 a.m. Laura was asleep in her bed, motionless, silent. Then, the audio changed. Breathing, close, right beside the microphone. Not hers, something else. The investigator leaned closer, heart pounding. And then, Laura's body moved, not waking up, not reacting, moving. Her arm lifted slowly into the air, reaching upward, like she was reaching for someone or something. Her fingers wrapped around empty space and held it, like she was holding a hand. The investigator felt his stomach drop, because her hand didn't look like it was grabbing nothing. It looked like something was grabbing her back. Then Laura's eyes opened, wide, terrified, and she whispered the words, "I see you." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened next. Because in the video, Laura's hand didn't let go. It tightened, like something invisible had just tightened its grip. And slowly, her arm began to lift higher, pulled upward by nothing, pulled toward the darkness above her bed. And just before the video ended, the breathing stopped, replaced by something else. A voice, not Laura's, not human, right beside the microphone, whispering one sentence, 3 words, "I see you too." After seeing Laura's footage, the lead investigator froze. He replayed it a dozen times, frame by frame, listening to every creak, every breath. The more he watched, the more he noticed a detail that hadn't been obvious at first: the timestamp. 3:17 a.m. every single time. Not just Laura, not just Marcus, Daniel, Emily, Kevin. Every case followed the same exact pattern. Always the same hour, always the same whisper, always the same presence. But then something even stranger appeared. In the background of Laura's video, almost imperceptible at first, a shadow moved differently from everything else. Not her body, not the furniture. It didn't even look human. It flickered, stretched, and disappeared, only to reappear in a slightly different position in the next frame. Investigators isolated the frames, zoomed in, adjusted brightness. What they saw made their stomachs drop. It was tall, too tall, slender, thin beyond reason. Its head seemed wrong, oversized. And the more they stared at the distortion, the more it seemed to be smiling. A wide, dark grin stretching across what shouldn't exist. One of the analysts whispered, barely audible, "It's watching us, isn't it?" No one responded. Then the calls started coming. From families, from surviving witnesses, from people they hadn't even interviewed yet. people who had experienced similar nightmares but hadn't died yet. One man claimed he had been dreaming the same thing every night, a tall figure in his room standing silently at the corner staring at him. He woke up every morning drenched in sweat, convinced it was real. And the strangest part, he had the same timestamp in his digital sleep tracker, 3:17 a.m. Another woman said she had woken up feeling cold air across her skin. Her sheets had been pulled back, yet she hadn't moved. Her bedroom door was closed. Nothing was visible except the shadowy outline of a figure standing by the window. The investigators realized something terrifying. This wasn't confined to a city, a neighborhood, or even a country. The pattern spanned years, decades, locations. No one knew where it came from, but it followed the same rules. Same time, same whisper, same presence. And the scariest revelation came from Laura herself. She had begun hearing it at random hours, not just 3:17 a.m. anymore, but any time she slept. Anywhere she slept, hotels, friends' homes, her own apartment. She confessed something chilling. "It's patient," she said. "It doesn't need hours. It doesn't need me to sleep properly. It waits, and it learns." Her voice dropped, a cold, shivering whisper. "And sometimes, it doesn't need to wait at all." The room went completely silent. Because that statement wasn't just terrifying, it was proof. Proof that whatever this was no longer bound by the rules. It wasn't just killing, not always. It was observing, selecting, studying, waiting for the exact moment it wanted. And somewhere far beyond their view, it was already watching them too. The investigator shivered, because deep down, he knew one unavoidable truth. They were next. 3 nights later, Laura didn't sleep. Not by choice, not by fear, not by accident. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring into the darkness of her bedroom, waiting for something she didn't fully understand, but she knew it was coming. At precisely 3:17 a.m., she felt it. Not a presence, not a shadow, not a sound. She felt the bed shift ever so slightly. Her sheets tugged. Not violently, just a subtle pull, like someone settling in beside her. She froze, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to run. Then she heard it. The breathing slow, wet, uneven, right beside her ear. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Her mouth opened. A whisper escaped, barely audible. "I see you." And then it moved. Not a hand, not a limb, but something brushing her shoulder. Light, cold, unbelievably thin, like fingers made of mist, yet solid, and it lingered. Laura felt the weight of it pressing her down slightly, forcing her against the mattress. Her eyes darted, scanning the darkness. She couldn't see it, not even an outline, but she felt it, every inch of it, watching, studying, smiling. She dared a tiny motion, turning her head just a little toward the corner where it always appeared. Her eyes widened. Nothing was there. And yet she knew. It had been there all along, invisible but undeniably present, and it was closer than it had ever been. Then she heard it whisper again, clearer this time. "I see you too." The words weren't for her, not exactly. They were for someone else, someone in the apartment. Her heart skipped. Her apartment was empty, except for her. Except for the thing standing beside her bed. Suddenly, the mark on her arm burned. Not pain, but a deep, penetrating heat. She tried to lift her hand, but it was stuck, held down by an invisible force. Then it touched her face. Light, a brush across her cheek, almost tender, but she knew better. It was claiming her, selecting her. She tried to speak. Nothing. Her body went rigid, and then it spoke. Not with lips, not with sound, but inside her head, clear, sharp, direct. "You belong." Laura's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She could only wait. And somewhere in the dark, just beyond her vision, she felt the smile. And she realized it wasn't smiling at her. It was smiling at whoever came after her. Because this was the rule, the pattern. The ones who saw it didn't survive. The ones it touched were marked. And now she had been chosen. A soft, wet breath whispered over her ear one last time before silence fell. But the silence wasn't peace. It was waiting. And Laura knew she would never be alone again. Detective Marcus Lang had been following the case from the beginning. He'd seen the videos. He'd read the reports. He met Laura Finch. And yet nothing could have prepared him for what came next. After reviewing Laura's footage late at night, he left the office feeling hollow. Something had shifted inside him. Something primal. That cold, wet, uneven breathing seemed to echo in his skull long after he turned off the monitor. He returned home trying to convince himself it was just stress, lack of sleep, too many hours staring at grainy black and white footage. But as soon as he stepped inside his apartment, he felt it. That weight, that oppressive presence he'd only seen on the recordings. He flicked the lights on. Nothing, everything in its place. Furniture aligned, windows closed, no shadow, no movement. And yet he knew. It was there. 3:16 a.m. He tried to ignore the clock, tried to sit, read, drink water. But then he heard it. A faint creak, a whisper, not from the hallway, not from outside, from inside his bedroom. He froze. The whisper was barely audible, but unmistakable. "I see you." His blood ran cold, the same 3 words, same tone, same dread. Marcus reached for his gun, just in case. His hand trembled, but nothing came into view. No face, no shadow, no movement. He backed toward the door, heart hammering, thinking of all the victims. Daniel, Emily, Marcus Hill, Kevin, Laura. He remembered the smile, the mark, the invisible touch, and he knew. He wasn't dreaming. He wasn't imagining it. It was here, and it had been waiting. Suddenly, a faint tap against the wall beside his bed. A single, deliberate tap, like fingernails against plaster. He turned, nothing, just the dark. Then another tap. And another. Closer, faster. His apartment felt alive, like the walls themselves were breathing, moving, watching. He dropped to the floor, crawled under the bed, heart racing, every instinct screaming at him to leave. But then silence. Dead silence. Too perfect. 3:17 a.m. And from the corner of the room, he felt it. Not a shadow, not a hand, not even a shape, but he felt it there, right behind him, pressing down, watching. And then in his own mind, a voice, whispering not from outside, but inside his skull. "You belong." Marcus couldn't move. He couldn't scream. His breath caught. His body froze. And somewhere in the silence, the faintest sound reached him. A grin, wide, wet, and impossibly close. Because he knew the pattern hadn't just chosen its victims. It had just chosen its next witness. And he was next. Detective Marcus Lang hadn't slept in hours. Not because he wanted to stay awake, but because the dread was unbearable. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the twisted, faceless smile from Laura's footage. Every time he breathed, he felt the cold, wet presence from the videos pressing against his skin. By 2:45 a.m., he decided to check his phone. Maybe distraction would help. He scrolled through emails, case files, mundane police alerts. Nothing unusual. Then a notification appeared. From an unknown number. No name, no message preview, just the timestamp, 3:17 a.m. He frowned. That's impossible. He hadn't received a call or text at that time. He hadn't even noticed the phone vibrate. The notification opened automatically. A video file. No subject, no sender, just a black screen. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to open it, but he clicked. And immediately, the room seemed colder. The video began, grainy, dark, timestamp glowing faintly in the corner, 3:16 a.m. It was his bedroom. The camera was somewhere, Not on a tripod, not on a shelf, just floating, suspended. A slight static hum. Marcus stared. Nothing moved at first, just the empty room. Then the blankets on his bed shifted. His body lifted slightly, like an invisible weight was pressing down. And then he saw it. A figure tall, slender, faceless, standing in the corner where no shadow should exist, watching him. He froze. The timestamp ticked forward, 3:17 a.m. The figure tilted its head just slightly, and for the first time, Marcus realized something even more horrifying. It wasn't alone. Shadows began to emerge from every corner of the room. Dark, writhing shapes, faceless, silent, smiling, waiting. He could feel them breathing, cold, wet, heavy, crushing. Then a whisper cut through the static, low, deadly, familiar. "I see you." And Marcus knew. It wasn't a recording of the past. It was happening now. Something invisible touched his shoulder, not hard, not violent, just enough to make his body lock. He turned slowly, nothing. But the whisper returned, this time directly in his mind. "You can't hide." Marcus's eyes widened, heart pounding, and somewhere behind him the grin grew, wider, watching, waiting. And then before he could move or scream, the video ended. Black screen, silence. Except he could still feel it. Breathing, smiling, closer than ever. After that night, Detective Marcus Lang couldn't sleep. Not really, not safely. Every creak, every distant hum, every shifting shadow set his nerves on fire. His apartment felt alive, watching, waiting, and he knew it wasn't paranoia. He had seen it. He had felt it. By day, he tried to rationalize. Maybe it was exhaustion, stress, something in his mind trying to process the case. But the shadows, they followed him even then. He noticed subtle changes. The timestamp on his digital clock always flickered at 3:17 a.m. even when it wasn't that hour. A faint cold draft would brush his neck for no reason, and sometimes his reflection in the mirror seemed delayed. It was during one of these brief moments of daylight that he received the first real warning. A package. No return address. No name. Just a plain black box, roughly the size of a shoebox. He hesitated. Instinct screamed at him not to open it, but curiosity, dangerous, irresistible, won. Inside was a small handheld camera, similar to the ones used in the previous cases, but it was switched on, recording, and on the screen, his own bedroom empty. A timestamp flickered faintly, 3:16 a.m. He swallowed hard. That wasn't the time now, that wasn't tonight, that wasn't anything he recognized. But the screen showed something moving, a shadow creeping along the floor, too long, too thin, faceless, smiling. Then it stopped, right in front of his bed. Marcus's pulse spiked, his breathing became shallow. The figure didn't move, it just waited. And then a faint whisper, "I see you." But this time, there was an extra word. "I see you coming." The screen went black. Marcus dropped the camera, heart hammering, mind racing, sweat running down his neck. He felt a cold gust brush past him, even though the windows were closed. He realized with a bone-deep chill that this wasn't just about watching anymore. It wasn't about the victims. It wasn't about the witnesses. It was about him. And it had already found a way in. Somewhere in the apartment, waiting, smiling, patient. He wasn't next. He was already here. And that's when he understood the true horror. There is no hiding from it. There is no escaping it. And the pattern would never end. Marcus knew he wasn't alone in his terror. After the package, he began digging deeper into past cases, searching for anyone who had survived. There weren't many, but a few names kept recurring, like fragments of a hidden history. Laura Finch, the nurse from 2015, and one other, a man from Texas who had emailed authorities years earlier claiming he had seen it in his room but had lived to tell the tale. His name was Samuel Torres. Marcus tracked him down. Samuel was living in a small, unassuming house on the outskirts of Houston. When Marcus arrived, he found a man who looked years older than his age, pale, jittery, constantly glancing at shadows that didn't exist, or at least, that most people couldn't see. Samuel welcomed him cautiously. They sat at the kitchen table. Silence stretched for minutes. Finally, Marcus asked the question on everyone's mind. "Why did you survive?" Samuel's eyes went cold. "You don't," he said flatly. "Not really." He went on to explain that the entity didn't kill everyone it encountered. Some survived, but they were marked, touched, selected. They carried its presence and it fed off them in ways no one could measure. Insomnia, paranoia, hallucinations, sometimes even sudden physical ailments. The body and mind could survive, but the shadow remained. He described his first encounter, 3:17 a.m., asleep alone. A figure appeared, tall, thin, faceless, breathing wetly beside his bed. He felt its touch, cold, soft, invasive, and then it smiled, not at him, but through him. "I lived because it wanted me to," Samuel admitted. "But that doesn't mean I'm free. Every night it comes back, watching, waiting, smiling." Marcus listened, heart pounding. Sweat ran down his back. He realized something terrifying. Survival didn't mean safety. It meant a lifetime of being observed, hunted in the shadows, constantly aware that the entity could strike when you least expect it. Then Samuel's phone vibrated, a notification. He hesitated. Marcus's stomach tightened. It was a video. Timestamp 3:16 a.m. The screen flickered, grainy black and white footage of their own kitchen. The whisper came before Marcus could even react. "I see you." And this time, both of them knew the truth. It didn't care who survived. It only cared who it wanted next. And now they were both on the list. After leaving Samuel Torres' house, Detective Marcus Lang felt the weight of the case like a physical force pressing down on his chest. Every corner of his apartment seemed darker, every shadow heavier. Every faint creak sounded like the slow, deliberate steps of something standing just beyond his vision. He replayed the videos again. Laura, Marcus Hill, Kevin Morales, Samuel Torres, and now his own encounters. The pattern was undeniable. 3:17 a.m. Always 3:17 a.m. Always a faceless presence. Always a touch. Always the whisper. Always the smile. Marcus compiled everything in one document, a timeline spanning decades, locations scattered across the country. Ages, genders, backgrounds, circumstances, all different, all unrelated, except for one constant. The hour, the presence, the whisper, "I see you." He called in forensic analysts, cybersecurity experts, even a parapsychologist, anything to explain it. Every single expert came to the same conclusion. There was no rational explanation, no intruder, no gas, no chemical, no virus, no sleep disorder. And yet the evidence was irrefutable. It existed, it was real, and it was spreading. Reports began surfacing online. Videos, blurry and dark, uploaded anonymously, showing figures in bedrooms, hospitals, dorm rooms. Subtle, fleeting, almost unnoticeable, but unmistakably there, all at the same hour, all faceless, all smiling, watching, waiting. Marcus knew the horrifying truth. The entity didn't just visit victims. It studied them, learned from them, adapted. And it wasn't bound by space or time. Locations, distances, even walls couldn't stop it. It existed wherever it wanted, and whoever it wanted was next. He sat alone, staring at the compiled reports on his screen. His own hands trembled as the clock ticked closer to 3:17 a.m. He felt it again, that cold, wet, uneven pressure on his shoulder, subtle just enough to make him shiver, not visible, not tangible, but undeniably present. A whisper echoed in his skull. "I see you." Marcus's blood ran cold. He wasn't investigating anymore. He was being investigated. And the clock was counting down. 3:16 a.m. 1 minute left. He gritted his teeth, gripping his chair, staring into the darkness of his apartment. Because he knew the entity had already chosen its next victim. And that victim was him. The pattern wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The night after confirming the pattern, Marcus Lang tried to sleep. He failed. Every sound in his apartment, creaks, hums, distant traffic, felt amplified, charged with menace. His eyes refused to close. Every time he blinked, the darkness behind his eyelids seemed alive, shifting, curling, stretching toward him. By 2:50 a.m., he gave up. He sat in the corner of his bedroom, knees drawn to his chest, listening, waiting. The silence was heavy, almost tactile, pressing against his eardrums. Then, just as the clock ticked 3:16 a.m., he heard it. A subtle rustle, a wet, uneven breath, right beside him, not loud, not aggressive, just there, patient, studying, waiting. Marcus froze. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, to escape. But his legs didn't move. His body was paralyzed, not physically, but psychologically. Every nerve ending screamed in terror. Every memory of Laura, Samuel, and the others flooded him. He knew what was coming. He tried to speak. Nothing. The presence didn't move, but he felt it lean closer. Too close. Too cold. Like icy fingers brushing his shoulder, his neck, the back of his head. He could feel the weight of it in his chest, constricting, suffocating. Then a whisper, low, sinister, almost inside his mind. "I see you." Marcus's stomach dropped. He forced his eyes open. Empty darkness. No shadow, no figure, nothing that could explain the suffocating pressure. And yet, he knew it was there. He tried to rise from the corner, tried to shake off the paralyzing dread. But every step felt heavier, slower. His apartment seemed to expand, walls stretching, floorboards creaking under invisible weight. The psychological terror didn't stop there. Suddenly he saw it, or thought he did. In the corner of the room, a shape, tall, slender, faceless, and that smile, not a normal smile, wide, black void stretching across where a face should be. Marcus blinked, it vanished. But when he blinked again, it was closer. Still smiling, watching, waiting. Every rational thought screamed at him, "It's impossible. It can't be real." Yet every fiber of his being told him it was. 3:17 a.m., the final minute. The entity moved, swift, precise, closer. And Marcus realized the most horrifying truth of all. It didn't just want to kill. It wanted him broken first. And the first crack in his mind had just begun. By the next day, Marcus realized he couldn't face this alone. He needed answers. He needed witnesses. Someone who had survived, someone who had felt what he was feeling. But more than that, he needed proof. He started reaching out. Online forums, dark web boards, anonymous messages. People who had posted about faceless figures, strange sleep experiences, or nightmares at 3:17 a.m. At first, it seemed futile. Most ignored him. Most had blocked their own accounts years ago. Then one reply came, short, cryptic. "Don't look behind you. It sees all of us." The sender didn't give a name. No location. Just a digital signature, Watcher 33. Marcus hesitated, but he had no choice. He typed back, "I'm still watching. Tell me what you know." Minutes later, the answer came. "It's patient, always patient. It doesn't need you asleep to find you. It learns, it spreads. You aren't alone. None of us are." As Marcus read, he felt the familiar pressure creeping along his neck. That same cold, wet awareness. And a thought slammed into him. He wasn't just being investigated. He was being recruited, or observed, picked out, marked. Suddenly, the sense of a community emerged, horrifying in its own way. People from all over the country, maybe the world, had survived its touch or had somehow been spared. They shared fragments of experience: the whisper, the smile, the mark. Some were trapped in hospitals, some had fled homes, some had even killed themselves after prolonged exposure. Marcus realized something even more terrifying. There was a rule. The more people who saw it, the more who survived it, the stronger it became, the smarter, the more it learned. He typed quickly, replying, "Where is it now?" A few seconds later, the message returned. "Right behind you." Marcus froze. The hairs on his arm stood straight. He turned just a fraction, half expecting to see it in his peripheral vision. Nothing. The room looked normal, empty, silent. But deep down, he knew better. It was watching, waiting, and it knew he had discovered the others. He paused, staring at his phone, and then, as if in response, he felt the faintest brush against his shoulder. Not violent, not aggressive, just intentional. The whisper came again, inside his mind. "I see you." And Marcus knew he wasn't alone. Not in the room, not in the world, and not in the battle to survive. He reached for his keyboard, typing with trembling hands. "I'm still watching." And he pressed send. The reply came instantly. "Don't look behind you." And that was the moment Marcus realized. The entity wasn't just faceless, wasn't just patient, and wasn't just smiling. It was building a network, a community of witnesses. All of them trapped, all of them marked. And now Marcus was one of them. Because in this game, the first rule was simple: you survive only if you play. But the next rule: no one ever survives. Marcus had to get out. He couldn't stay in his apartment. The walls felt alive, the shadows patient, the air thick with something cold, wet, and watching. He booked the cheapest hotel room he could find in the city, something anonymous, quiet, far from anything that tied him to the investigation. Check-in was uneventful. The clerk barely looked at him. No questions asked. Perfect. He entered the room and immediately felt wrong. The layout was ordinary, the furniture standard, but the atmosphere was heavy, suffocating. The shadows clung to the corners, darker than they should have been. The faint hum of the AC became a low, almost breath-like rhythm. Marcus tried to reason it away. Stress, lack of sleep, caffeine, his mind was playing tricks. He set up his laptop, recording devices, even a motion sensor. He wasn't taking chances, not after everything. By 11:30 p.m., he tried to distract himself with paperwork. Case notes, survivor testimonies, timelines. But the tick of the clock grew louder, echoing in the small room. The air felt colder, denser. And then it started. First, a whisper, almost imperceptible at first, curling around the edges of his consciousness. "I see you." Marcus froze, not in fear, he was used to that, but in disbelief. It was here, already. The hotel room was just another container. It didn't matter that he was away from home. It didn't matter that he was alone. The temperature dropped drastically. The shadows shifted. One elongated into the center of the room, thin, impossibly tall, faceless. It didn't walk, it glided, floating, hovering above the floor like liquid darkness, each movement deliberate, patient. Marcus tried to leave the room. Door handle locked, not jammed, just impossible to open. The room became a trap. He reached for his camera, turned it on, pointed it at the corner. The shadows rippled. The timestamp glowed faintly, 3:16 a.m. The shadow moved closer, and Marcus felt the first touch, not hard, not violent, but chilling. It grazed his neck, his shoulder, sending a shiver deep into his bones. He could feel it analyzing him, calculating. Then the whisper again, clear, inside his head. "You're mine now." Marcus's breath caught. He realized there was no escape. It didn't need walls, doors, or locks. It existed wherever it wanted, watching him, marking him, and learning from him. And just before the timestamp hit 3:17 a.m., It leaned closer, close enough to feel its presence pressing against his chest. Marcus understood then what everyone else had learned the hard way. Surviving wasn't winning. Surviving meant it had already chosen him. And now it was just beginning. Marcus couldn't sleep. Not that night, not any night since he'd seen the pattern unfold. Every shadow seemed alive, every breeze a whisper. Every floorboard creak felt deliberate, like someone, or something, was packing just out of sight. At 2:58 a.m., his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. No area code he recognized. Instinct screamed at him to ignore it. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. But curiosity, fatal curiosity, won. The screen lit up, calling 3:17 a.m. The timestamp blinked. It wasn't the time yet, not technically, but the seconds counted down like a bomb ticking. Marcus pressed ignore. Immediately, the phone vibrated violently, not just buzzing but trembling as if it were alive. A low static hiss emanated from the speaker, and then a whisper. "I see you." Not through the phone, inside his head, clear, sharp, ice cold. The words didn't echo, they burned, they carved into his skull. His heart raced, pulse pounding, hands shaking. He tried to turn on the light, nothing. His apartment was bathed in darkness. Even the LEDs on his electronics flickered strangely, like they were struggling to stay on. Another whisper, louder, closer. "You can't hide, you can't leave." Marcus dropped the phone. It skittered across the floor, vibrating until it landed face up. The screen lit again. A video file had appeared. Timestamp 3:16 a.m. Grainy black and white footage. His apartment empty, silent, but shadows moved where they shouldn't, elongated, flickering fluid, one in the corner, tall, faceless, smiling, watching, waiting. The static hiss became breathing, wet, uneven, closer than the shadows on the screen. Then a chill ran down his spine. He felt the first touch soft, cold, pressing lightly on the back of his neck. Not a hand, not a finger, but the unmistakable sense of something tangible, yet impossible. A whisper right beside his ear, not from the phone, not from the room, but inside his mind. "You answered." He hadn't. And that's when he realized the horrifying truth. It didn't matter if he answered or not. It didn't matter if he ran, hid, or stayed awake. It already knew he was listening. And it had marked him. 3:17 a.m. approached. The seconds stretched. The entity was patient. It always was. And tonight, it was coming for him. By the time 3:16 a.m. rolled around, Marcus was trembling. His apartment no longer felt like his own. Every corner pulsed with expectation. Every shadow stretched unnaturally, reaching toward him. He had tried lights, tried cameras, tried recording devices, but nothing stopped it. Nothing could. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the bathroom mirror across the room. A foolish idea had taken root. Maybe, just maybe, seeing it in reflection could give him proof. Maybe he could confront it and finally understand what he was dealing with. The minutes ticked painfully. 3:16:33, 16:45. And then he felt it behind him. That same cold, wet pressure brushing across his shoulders. Patient, smiling, observing, waiting. He slowly turned his head toward the mirror. At first, nothing, just his own reflection, pale, sweat-soaked, wide-eyed. Then a flicker. A shadow detached from the corner of the bathroom. Long, too long, thin beyond reason, faceless. The mouth stretched impossibly wide into a grin that seemed to absorb the light around it. It didn't move toward him in the mirror. It didn't have to. It was already there, already inside the reflection and somehow inside him. Marcus's pulse pounded in his ears. He tried to look away. His eyes wouldn't obey. The figure's grin widened. The black void of its face seemed to twist, morphing, until it was smiling directly at him, not from the mirror, but from inside the glass itself. A whisper crawled through the room, low, wet, uneven, right from behind him. You can't hide. Marcus's stomach dropped. He slowly turned in the real world. Nothing. His apartment was empty, no shadow, no figure. But the reflection didn't lie. The entity was inside the mirror, inside his reflection, inside his mind. And with every blink it learned. Every breath he took it memorized. Every move he made it calculated. The reflection twisted slightly. Its smile became sharper. Teeth, impossibly long and jagged, appeared for a fraction of a second before vanishing again. Marcus's fingers trembled as he reached for his phone, to record, to call for help, to prove he wasn't losing his mind. Before he could act, a cold, wet brush grazed the back of his neck. The whisper returned, inside his skull, not through sound. I see you, I've always seen you. And in the mirror, the reflection leaned closer. Closer than possible. And that's when Marcus realized it didn't just observe, it imitated, it mirrored. It became the person it hunted. 3:17 a.m. The minute had arrived. And Marcus knew with a bone-deep certainty that he was no longer alone in the room, in the reflection, or in his own mind. Marcus hadn't slept properly in days. Every creak of his apartment, every shadow on the walls, every flicker of light felt like a warning. The mirrors, the screens, even the digital clock, it all pulsed with anticipation, counting down to 3:17 a.m. That night he tried to stay distracted. He watched old news footage, ran through the survivor testimonies again, anything to keep his mind occupied. But then he heard a faint knock at the door. At first he froze. No one should know where he lived. No one should be there. He approached slowly, every instinct screaming danger. Another knock, louder this time, deliberate, patient. Marcus peeked through the peephole. Nothing, empty hallway, silent, no one. But then a slip of paper appeared, fluttering across the threshold as if thrown by the wind itself. He bent down, picked it up. It read, "You can't run, we are all watching." No signature, no hint of who delivered it, just the message. A cold chill ran down his spine. His heart pounded. He shoved the paper into his pocket, but before he could step back from the door, he heard it. A faint breathing, slow, wet, uneven, right behind him. He turned, empty. But the pressure hit immediately. Cold, heavy, like someone or something was pressing down on his shoulder, analyzing him, studying him. He felt the brush of invisible fingers across his neck. Then the whisper inside his head. "You can't hide, you belong." Marcus spun toward the doorway again, still empty. The hall was still silent, no one in sight. He backed into the room, hands trembling, aware of every shadow. And then from the corner of the living room, a movement. Subtle, faint, but unmistakable. A figure, tall, faceless, impossibly thin, glided across the floor. No sound except the wet whisper of its presence. He grabbed a camera, hoping to capture it. But the lens revealed nothing. Blackness, empty room. And yet he could feel it. Waiting, watching, smiling. Marcus realized then, it didn't just appear where it wanted. It knew where he was before he even moved. It anticipated him. It adapted. It was smarter, faster, more patient than anyone could imagine. And in that moment, the truth hit him harder than fear ever could. He wasn't just a target anymore. He was part of the pattern, the network of the watched, and it had just sent a message that he couldn't ignore. 3:17 a.m. was approaching. And tonight, he wasn't alone. By now, Marcus had learned one undeniable truth. The entity didn't need doors to enter. It didn't need walls. It didn't need an invitation. It existed everywhere it wanted to exist, and tonight it chose the windows. He was hunched on the couch, laptop open, running through surveillance footage from past victims, trying desperately to find a pattern, any clue that could give him leverage. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Every corner pressed against his vision, dense with shadows. Then he noticed it, a flicker at the edge of the blinds, a movement, a black silhouette gliding just outside, too thin to be human, its faceless head tilted slowly, observing, waiting. Marcus's pulse skyrocketed. He grabbed a chair and slammed it against the window, rattling the blinds. The silhouette didn't flinch, didn't disappear. It just lingered, smiling, that impossible, wide, void-like grin. He stumbled back, heart pounding, and tried to reason. Reflection, streetlight, something mundane. No, the shape didn't belong there. The cold pressure immediately followed, brushing against his neck and shoulders as if it had materialized behind him simultaneously. Then the whisper came, inside his mind, sharp, icy, unmistakable. "I see you." Marcus spun around. Empty room. Nothing. Every shadow was still, every object in place. But the oppressive weight didn't lift. The air was thick, damp, suffocating. He dared to look back at the window. The figure was closer now, closer than possible. Its head tilted in perfect synchronization with his own movements. Smiling, waiting, patient. A chill raced through his spine. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. The entity had adapted, anticipating him, learning him. It wasn't just watching, it was studying. Observing patterns, timing, weaknesses. It knew every move he would make before he made it. Marcus backed away slowly, realizing the horrifying implications. It didn't just follow its victims, it manipulated their environment, controlled it, infiltrated it. And windows, mirrors, even cameras were its tools. The whisper came again, louder, dripping with intent. "You belong to me now." A sudden gust of icy wind blew through the apartment, even though all the windows were closed. Marcus felt the weight shift across his chest, pressing him into the floor. The blinds rattled violently. He forced his eyes toward the corner of the living room. Darkness pulsed there, alive, smiling. And then he understood the ultimate truth. The entity didn't merely stalk. It hunted, and Marcus was already inside the kill zone. 3:17 a.m. was seconds away. And outside the window, it waited. Marcus's heart hadn't stopped racing since the window incident. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but there was nowhere to run. Every hotel, every apartment, every safe space he tried seemed vulnerable. The entity wasn't bound by walls, doors, or distance. It existed wherever it chose. That night he sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn up. The digital clock glowed faintly. 3:15 a.m. 1 minute left. Every tick seemed louder, echoing through the small room. He could feel the tension coiling in his chest, his lungs tightening, each breath shallow and strained. Then he noticed it. Not a shape, not a shadow, not a movement, but a breath. Cold, wet, uneven, right against the back of his neck. It wasn't audible, it wasn't visible, but the sensation was undeniable. Ice crawling through his veins, goosebumps erupting across his skin. Marcus tried to turn. Nothing. The room appeared empty. The shadows clung to the corners, quivering. His reflection in the darkened window seemed delayed, just slightly, like it was thinking, calculating, mocking him. The whisper followed inside his head, low and deliberate. "I'm closer than you think." He tried to reach for his phone, to call for help, to record proof, but his fingers trembled uncontrollably, every muscle locked with dread. The presence behind him shifted slightly, brushing against his shoulders, chest, the back of his head. He could feel its weight, its patient awareness. And then the whisper changed. Not words, sounds, almost like a wet, drawn-out exhale, intentionally mimicking his own breathing, a cruel mirror of his panic. He realized with horror, the entity didn't just watch, it mimicked, it learned. It became its victim in terrifying ways. Marcus's eyes darted to the dark corners. The shadows rippled like liquid. The air pressed down, heavy, suffocating. He could no longer distinguish what was real and what was imagined. The boundary had blurred. The entity wasn't a visitor anymore. It was inside him, inside the room, inside the very fabric of perception. Then the final whisper before 3:17 a.m. It's time. The temperature dropped further. His chest tightened. Every nerve screamed terror. And from the corner, a shape, tall, faceless, impossibly thin, emerged from the darkness, gliding without a sound, smiling. That wide, impossible grin, waiting. Marcus understood in that instant. It didn't need to touch to terrify. Its presence alone was enough to break the mind. And tonight, the unseen breath wasn't just a warning. It was the beginning of the hunt. Marcus's panic had reached a new peak. He could no longer trust the space around him. Every surface, every corner, every shadow seemed alive. Every sound carried meaning. A creak in the floor, a hum in the pipes, the faintest scrape against the walls. Each one felt intentional, deliberate, designed to unnerve him, to make him aware that nothing in this room was his own. At 3:15 a.m., the air thickened. The clock ticked relentlessly toward 3:17. He huddled in the corner, gripping his knees, trying to make himself as small as possible. But the apartment itself seemed to push back, as if it were aware of him, waiting for him to act. Then came the sound. A whisper, soft, wet, almost like someone exhaling through a rag, but coming from the walls themselves. "I hear you." Marcus froze, not from fear, from disbelief. He pressed his ear against the plaster. Nothing tangible. No crack, no opening, no speaker. But the sound continued, wrapping around his skull, crawling inside his mind. Every thought. The pressure increased, cold, heavy. It wasn't just on his shoulders this time. It moved through the walls, brushing across his spine, chest, even into his head. The apartment wasn't empty. It had never been empty. Marcus's eyes darted around the room. Shadows shifted. The corners weren't corners, they were waiting zones. Mirrors reflected not him, but the figure looming just beyond perception. And then the walls themselves seemed to breathe, pulsating slightly, subtly, as if alive. The whisper returned, this time mocking, echoing his own fears, repeating phrases he hadn't spoken aloud. "You can't hide. You're mine. You're already mine." Marcus staggered backward, falling against the bed. His pulse pounded in his ears. His lungs burned, but it wasn't done. The pressure on his chest intensified, synchronized with the whisper. He realized the horrifying truth. The entity didn't just occupy physical space. It occupied perception. Every wall, every object, every reflection was a conduit. It could exist anywhere, behind him, beside him, inside the very materials that built the apartment. And as the clock ticked to 3:17 a.m., Marcus felt it lean in. Not a movement he could see, but one he could feel, invasive, intimate, absolute. "I am everywhere, and you." The final words were swallowed by silence. But the weight remained. Cold, wet, watching. Marcus knew, with bone-deep certainty, that he wasn't just being hunted. He was already trapped. The walls weren't protecting him. They were the prison. And 3:17 a.m. had arrived. Marcus had been on edge for hours. Every shadow stretched unnaturally, every sound amplified to unbearable levels. Even sitting still, he felt pressure crawling over his skin, subtle, wet, deliberate. His apartment no longer belonged to him. Every corner pulsed with awareness, every reflection whispered, "I see you." At 3:15 a.m., he noticed something on his phone. The screen had been dark, but now it flickered faintly, a pale white glow that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own heartbeat. He picked it up cautiously. No notifications, no calls, nothing. But the glow continued, almost like it had a mind of its own. Then a message appeared, one line. "Look closer." Marcus swallowed hard. He tapped the screen. Nothing, just a small blinking cursor, and then the front camera activated. The live feed displayed his bedroom, empty, silent, calm, almost normal. Almost. And then the shadow appeared. Long, faceless, smiling, hovering above the floor like liquid darkness. Its head tilted slightly, observing him from the screen. Not the room, not the walls, from the phone. Marcus's breath caught. The familiar cold pressure grazed his shoulder. He realized it had followed him, had infiltrated his devices, learned his routines, predicted his actions. The whisper came, sharp and wet, but now from the phone itself. "You can't escape me." His hand shook as he turned off the screen. Nothing changed. The shadows remained. The air was heavy, damp, suffocating. He realized it wasn't just inside his apartment anymore. It was inside his mind, his devices, his perception. There was no place left untouched. The phone flickered again. Another message appeared. 3:17 a.m. Time's up. Marcus's chest tightened. The pulse in his veins matched the digital countdown. The entity wasn't patient anymore. It was ready. The shadows moved closer in the corners, shifting fluidly. The air itself seemed to press down, thicker, wetter, alive. He tried to stand, to run, to escape, but his body refused. The entity's pressure held him down, intimate and invasive, as though he had already surrendered without knowing it. Then the whisper, direct inside his skull, not the phone, not the room. "I am everywhere, I am always watching, and now you are mine." Marcus's eyes widened. The shadows coalesced. The room's temperature dropped to freezing. The air became wet and heavy, suffocating. And then silence. But Marcus knew. It wasn't over. It never would be. Because now he understood the final, terrifying truth. It wasn't hunting anymore. It was finished. And he had already lost. By the time 3:18 a.m. hit, Marcus realized something terrifying. The entity didn't just invade rooms, it could bend reality itself. The apartment was no longer the apartment he knew. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, thickening like liquid. Every corner seemed to bleed darkness, pooling into the center of the room. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, their surfaces rippling subtly as if breathing. Marcus pressed his hands against the plaster, expecting solidity, but the texture shifted under his fingers, soft, wet, almost alive. He recoiled. Every nerve in his body screamed. This wasn't possible. Walls couldn't move. Walls couldn't breathe. Walls couldn't watch. But they did. From the melting corners, darkness unfurled. It crept across the floor like tar, silent but purposeful. The faceless figure emerged from the center, taller, wider, its smile stretching further than before. Marcus could see no edges, no defined shape, just darkness with intent. The air was cold, heavy, damp. Breathing became a struggle. Each inhale carried the sense of being observed, each exhale a warning. He tried to step back, but the floor seemed to pulse under his feet, expanding and contracting like living tissue. Then the whisper came, not through sound, not through the phone or walls, directly inside his skull, vibrating through every nerve. "You can't leave. There is nowhere left to hide." The shadows thickened, twisting, moving, forming multiple faceless shapes. Each one grinned impossibly wide, their presence pressing on Marcus from all sides. He tried to run, but the room's dimensions had shifted. Hallways appeared where walls were, ceilings stretched, doors vanished. A sudden wet brush against his neck made him spin. Nothing, just the darkness folding and curling around him. He realized with bone-deep dread, the entity didn't just stalk victims, it consumed spaces, it transformed them, and once it had marked someone, the very environment became a hunting ground. Marcus's eyes darted to the mirror. The reflection wasn't him, not entirely. Shadows of faceless figures lingered behind his image, grinning, watching. Each blink brought them closer. Then the whisper again, this time multiple voices layered, echoing. "It's time, it's time, it's time." The walls now rippled violently, pooling darkness at his feet. The room became a labyrinth of shadows, all edges impossible to trace. Marcus realized the horrifying truth. It didn't just want him scared. It wanted him trapped. Inside a space it controlled. Inside a nightmare it created. Inside the very walls that had once been his sanctuary. And now he understood 3:19 a.m. was approaching. And it would not forgive. Marcus barely had time to catch his breath. The walls weren't just alive, they were breeding darkness. Shadows twisted and multiplied, crawling along the ceiling, pooling in the corners, slithering across the floor. Each movement was purposeful, predatory, and impossibly fast. The apartment he thought he knew was gone. In its place was a living, breathing nightmare, and he was at its center. He stumbled backward, hitting the dresser. A reflection caught his eye in the darkened window, more than one figure now. 2, 3, 5. Each faceless, impossibly tall, grinning wide. They mirrored his panic perfectly, as if mocking him, and yet each was subtly different, learning from his movements, predicting his next breath. Marcus raised his hands, desperate for a weapon, a camera, anything. But the shadows didn't flinch. They didn't need weapons. The air itself was their tool. The pressure intensified, pressing into his chest, dragging his mind into a panic so visceral it almost became physical pain. The whisper returned, layered, surrounding him like a chorus of wet, uneven breaths. "You can't hide, you can't fight, you are mine." Marcus spun, trying to track all the figures, but every time he blinked, their number increased. They were everywhere, in the reflection, in the corners, in the walls. Some coalesced, forming taller, more grotesque shapes, each grin impossibly wide, each movement deliberate, testing his limits. A cold brush grazed his shoulder, then another, faster, wet, invasive. His skin crawled, every nerve ending screamed. Panic clawed at his chest. The whispers grew louder, almost tangible, pressing inside his skull. "We are all around you. We have always been." Marcus's eyes darted to the clock. 3:21 a.m. The shadows weren't bound by the minute. They didn't follow rules. Time was meaningless. They learned, they adapted, they multiplied. He realized with bone-deep dread that he wasn't fighting one entity anymore. He was trapped in a swarm, a hive of faceless, grinning predators, each observing, each patient, each learning from him. And Marcus understood the truth that would haunt him forever. The more he panicked, the faster they multiplied. The more he ran, the closer they became. And the more he blinked, the fewer boundaries remained between him and the nightmare surrounding him. He was already inside it, and it was feeding on his fear. Marcus sank to the floor, back against the wall, gasping for air that seemed impossibly thin. The shadows had multiplied beyond comprehension, dozens now stretching across walls, pooling from the ceiling, slithering across the floor like living oil. They didn't just move, they flowed, coalescing, splitting, folding into shapes that should have been impossible, and the sound of the sound was unbearable. 1,000 whispers, wet, uneven, low, and intimate, filled the room. Not from any speaker, not from the walls themselves, not even the air. They filled Marcus's skull, echoing in every corner of his mind, overlapping, layering, twisting. "You can't escape. You can't run. You are mine." The voices mimicked his own thoughts, his own fears, repeating them louder, sharper, mocking him. Marcus pressed his hands to his ears, trying to shut it out, but the whispers didn't exist in the room, they existed in him. Inside his skull, inside his perception. And worse, they weren't just repeating, they were learning. He realized with pure horror that every attempt to resist only made them sharper, more precise, more invasive. A shadow detached from the rest, sliding along the floor toward him. It was impossibly thin, faceless, yet its grin stretched wider than sanity allowed. Marcus tried to stand, to run, to scream, but the entity's presence pressed on him like liquid iron. Every breath he took felt borrowed, every movement anticipated. And then came the first touch he couldn't ignore. A cold, wet brush across the back of his neck, curling into his hairline. Not harsh, not violent, but intimate, invasive, deliberate. The whispers surged, now layered with hundreds of wet breaths, one atop the other, surrounding him, pressing, suffocating, almost tasting his fear. Marcus's mind struggled to rationalize. He thought of leaving, of calling someone, anything. But the shadows weren't just physical. They had infiltrated his perception, his devices, his very reality. Mirrors, windows, even the darkened corners, all conduits, all feeding him fear, feeding themselves. Then the whispers converged into a single phrase, clear, ice cold inside his skull. You belong to us now. There is no way out. Marcus realized the true horror. This wasn't stalking anymore. This wasn't hunting. This was assimilation. The entity and its shadows weren't just watching. They were invading, consuming, learning, and remaking his perception into a trap with no exit. He curled into himself, shaking. The whispers didn't stop. The shadows multiplied. The air thickened, damp and suffocating. His pulse raced with a primal understanding. The nightmare had transcended physical form. It existed everywhere, inside everything, and it had claimed him. And as the clock ticked closer to 3:22 a.m., Marcus understood the unthinkable. Survival wasn't an option anymore. Resistance was irrelevant. He was already part of the entity, and the entity was only beginning to feed. Marcus's eyes were wide, every nerve screaming. The apartment no longer felt real. The shadows had multiplied to the point that the walls themselves were unrecognizable, pulsing with a darkness that seemed alive. But then, he noticed something new. The ceiling. It wasn't just above him anymore. It was moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the panels seemed to droop, sag, bending downward as though the room itself was breathing, or worse, alive. Each moment brought it closer, a suffocating weight pressing down, the edges rippling like black water. Marcus's heart slammed in his chest. He pressed back against the wall, trying to put distance between himself and the descending ceiling, but it didn't stop. It pressed, not physically, but mentally, as if the very air itself were trying to squeeze the panic out of him. From the corners, shadows stretched upward, joining the ceiling, merging into the black, pulsing mass. The faceless figures he had seen before now climbed from walls, gliding along the ceiling like predators, their impossible grins wider than he could comprehend. Each movement was deliberate, synchronized with his fear, feeding on it, learning from it. The whispers returned, louder, sharper, overlapping. A chorus of wet, uneven breaths murmuring in his skull. You can't escape, you can't hide, it's already inside you. Marcus tried to scream. Nothing. His voice came out as a strangled whisper, swallowed by the oppressive weight of the ceiling and the shadows above. His lungs burned. Every breath carried the sensation of fingers brushing along his skin, icy and wet. He realized with crushing clarity, this wasn't just stalking. The entity had learned how to manipulate his perception, warping the environment itself to terrorize him, to trap him in a nightmare with no exit. The ceiling pressed closer. The shadows seemed to coalesce into a singular, massive figure, faceless, impossibly tall, its grin stretching from one side of the room to the other. Marcus could feel its presence not only above him, but in every inch of the apartment, in every corner of his mind. The whispers converged into one phrase, a single sentence that tore through his thoughts. You are mine, and there is no light left for you. Marcus's vision blurred. The ceiling descended further, the shadows pressing, the air thick, damp, suffocating. He realized the horrifying truth. The apartment wasn't just a room. It was a living trap. And tonight, the ceiling would decide how he was consumed. The clock blinked, 3:23 a.m. And there was no escape. Marcus's panic had reached its peak. The ceiling descended, the walls pulsed, shadows multiplied. But now the ground itself betrayed him. The floorboards beneath his feet rippled as if liquid, uneven and impossibly soft. Each step he took sank slightly, a wet, squelching resistance pressing upward, tugging at him, trying to drag him down. He stumbled, arms flailing, heart hammering, realizing that the apartment no longer obeyed the rules of physics. The shadows weren't just around him anymore, they were under him. Faces without features emerged from the warped floor, grinning impossibly wide. Their movement was deliberate, a crawling, fluid approach. Every time he lifted a foot, a shadow reached for it, stretching and twisting impossibly to block him. Marcus fell to his knees. The air was thick, suffocating, wet, and cold. Every inhale carried the pressure of invisible hands pressing on his chest. The whispers returned, dozens layered over each other, moist, uneven, invasive. "You can't run, you are mine forever." He pressed his palms to the floor, trying to stabilize himself. It rippled beneath his hands, shifting as if alive, pulsing with awareness. Marcus realized the horrifying truth. The apartment had become an extension of the entity itself. Walls, ceiling, and now floor, everything was alive, aware, waiting. He tried to crawl toward the door, but the hallway extended infinitely. Each step forward led him to the same room, warped and black, like a loop designed to trap him. The shadows multiplied further, now rising from the floor in every direction, surrounding him, grinning wider than reality should allow. The whispers sharpened, now layered with mockery and anticipation. "You belong here, there is nowhere left, your fear feeds us." Marcus's mind raced. Cameras, phones, mirrors, nothing mattered. Every surface, every object, every reflection was a conduit for the entity. It had learned, adapted, and transformed the apartment into a living nightmare. And then the floor beneath him pulsed violently. Wetness seeped upward, a chilling touch crawling over his skin. He realized in terror, the entity didn't need to touch him directly. Its very environment was a weapon, alive, patient, and infinite. The digital clock glowed faintly across the warped room. 3:24 a.m. Marcus understood the unbearable truth. He had no footing, no escape, no refuge. He was trapped. The entity had claimed the room, the floor, the air, and now it was claiming him. Marcus's breaths came in ragged gasps. The floor squelched beneath him, the shadows swarmed, the ceiling pressed down. But now the lights flickered. Not just a faint flicker, but violent, stuttering pulses that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. The apartment plunged into darkness, then bursts of dim, sickly illumination, then darkness again, over and over like some cruel strobe. He tried to focus, to orient himself, but the room shifted every time the lights blinked. Shadows stretched impossibly long in some flashes, flattened into nothing in others. The entities weren't just around him, they were inside the darkness itself. And when the lights briefly returned, he could see dozens of faceless figures surrounding him, their grins wider, unnatural, impossibly distorted. Marcus stumbled backward, hands shaking, trying to find a wall, a door, something real. But each pulse of light revealed the room as fluid, alive, a nightmare in motion. Objects shifted subtly between flashes. The dresser, the chair, the window, they were all slightly out of place each time he blinked, as if the room was remembering and mocking him. Then the whispers returned, louder, wetter, layered like a storm inside his skull. "The light cannot save you. You are mine forever." His phone flashed once, a notification, no, a message, one word. Now, the entity's presence pressed against him, heavier than ever. Every flicker of light was a revelation. Shadows coalescing into monstrous shapes, stretching impossibly, some taller than the ceiling, some crawling along the warped floor toward him. Each blink brought new horrors. Each pulse fed his panic. Marcus realized the horrifying truth. The lights weren't his friend. They didn't illuminate reality. They revealed the entity's power. Every flash reminded him how powerless he was, how trapped, how alone. The room was no longer a sanctuary. It was a predator. Then the final flicker. The lights died completely. Darkness so complete it seemed to have weight, silence. But Marcus could still hear it. The wet, uneven breathing, the whispers in his skull, the grin that existed even without eyes, even without shape. And he understood. In the darkness, it didn't need sight. It didn't need him to see it. It already had him. And the lights were gone forever. The darkness was suffocating. Marcus could no longer tell where the floor ended, where the ceiling began, or where the walls began. The apartment had become a living, pulsating organism, breathing around him. Every inhale of air was thick, wet, cold, pressing into his lungs as if the room itself was drawing life from him. He pressed his back against a wall, desperate for stability, but the surface beneath him shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, like the wall was inhaling, expanding slightly. Then it exhaled. The sensation was wet, cold, and invasive, as if invisible fingers pressed through the plaster, curling into his skin. The whispers had multiplied, not just surrounding him but inside him now, reverberating in every nerve, every synapse, every heartbeat. There's nowhere left, nowhere, you are ours. Marcus tried to move to escape, but the walls leaned in. Shadows stretched from the corners, coalescing into tall, faceless shapes. They didn't run. They didn't attack. They waited, patient, their impossible grins stretching wider with every pulse of fear he emitted. The room seemed alive in response to his panic. Every thought, every heartbeat, every shallow breath caused the walls to shift, to pulse, to respond. The floor squelched under his weight. The ceiling drooped closer. The walls seemed to curve inward, enclosing him in a space that no longer followed geometry, physics, or reason. Marcus realized the horrifying truth. This was no longer a simple haunting. No intruder could have manipulated the environment like this. It wasn't just stalking him. It had transformed reality itself into a weapon. The apartment wasn't a space he occupied. He was inside it, and it was inside him. And the wet, uneven breathing intensified. A subtle exhale brushed the back of his neck. Another, and another. The entity was everywhere at once, inside the walls, inside the shadows, inside his mind. It was learning, waiting, feeding. Marcus's eyes darted to the digital clock across the warped room. 3:25 a.m. He understood with sickening clarity that there would be no pause, no moment to breathe, no light to help him. The walls themselves were alive, patient, and deliberate. And the entity had decided, tonight he wouldn't survive his own home. Every inch of space pressed against him. Every shadow watched. Every whisper screamed in his skull. And in that moment, Marcus realized the ultimate truth. The walls weren't just surrounding him. They were hunting him, and he could feel them closing in. Marcus's trembling eyes darted across the warped apartment, desperate for anything stable, anything real. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner whispered, every surface pulsed with a presence that should not exist. But then his gaze fell on the mirror across the room. It wasn't his reflection that stared back, not entirely. The glass was darkened, rippling subtly as though liquid, and within it, something moved independently of him. Faceless figures emerged from the mirrored surface, taller than the ceiling, impossibly thin, grinning wide. Their heads tilted in unison with his own, but ever so slightly delayed, mocking him, studying him. Marcus's chest tightened. Every breath came in short, sharp bursts. The whispers swirled in his skull, wet, uneven, relentless. Look, look, look closer, you belong to us. He tried to turn away, but the mirror refused to release his gaze. Even when he averted his eyes, shapes lingered at the edges of his vision, shadows in the corner of his mind. And when he blinked, the figures in the reflection had moved closer, faster, closer, grinning wider. He realized with bone-deep terror that the mirror wasn't reflecting reality. It was reality, or at least a version of it that the entity controlled. What he saw in that glass was the truth of the nightmare. He was surrounded, trapped, observed. Not just by shadows, not just by the walls, not just by the floor, but by every surface, every reflection, every inch of his own perception. The whispers sharpened, layered atop themselves, dripping inside his mind. You cannot leave, you cannot run, we are everywhere, we are inside you. Marcus pressed his palm to the mirror, expecting cold glass, solid and unyielding. But the surface rippled under his touch, wet, pliable, almost alive. His fingertips sank slightly, leaving impressions that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Panic overtook him, an instinctual, primal terror. The mirror wasn't a boundary, it was a doorway. And then the figures stepped forward, or at least it seemed that way. Their faceless heads tilted toward him in perfect unison. That impossible, wide grin stretched across the mirror's surface, and Marcus could feel it, inside him, crawling up his spine, pressing into his mind. The clock blinked faintly, 3:26 a.m. He realized in a suffocating, cold certainty. The mirror wasn't showing the nightmare, it was the nightmare. And soon, he would no longer be just an observer. He would become part of the reflection. And the reflection was hungry. Marcus's mind teetered on the edge of collapse. Every second had blurred into an endless nightmare of shadows, whispers, and impossible movements. The walls, ceiling, floor, even mirrors had become instruments of terror, all controlled by the entity that had been stalking him, learning him, consuming him. But now, it revealed itself fully. From the corner of the warped room, the largest shadow coalesced into a singular, towering figure. Faceless, impossibly tall, limbs stretching in ways that defied reality. Its grin, oh, the grin. Wider than the room, wider than sanity itself, stretching impossibly across what Marcus thought was its face. Every time he blinked, it widened further. It was mocking, intimate, deliberate, predatory. The whispers stopped. For a moment there was only silence, thick, suffocating, wet silence. Then, in one chilling instant, the voice came directly inside his skull, louder than ever. It's over, and yet it's only beginning. Marcus could feel the entity pressing on every nerve, infiltrating his mind, his body, his perception. Every attempt to move was anticipated. Every heartbeat echoed inside the figure's awareness. The apartment itself had become a vessel for its presence. Shadows curled and wrapped around him, pressing him into the floor, into the walls, into the very fabric of the nightmare. He tried to scream. His voice came out as a strangled gasp. His arms flailed. Nothing worked. The figure's grin seemed to stretch into his vision, his mind, his very soul. He could feel the wet, uneven pressure sliding along his skin, inside his chest, crawling through his veins. The figure leaned closer, or perhaps Marcus's perception bent to make it feel so. Every inch it moved pressed on his sanity, making reality dissolve. And then it spoke again, slow, deliberate, savoring each syllable inside his skull. You belong to me forever. The whispers returned, layered with 1,000 voices, echoing his own fear back at him. The shadows pulsed and coalesced into forms that mirrored every nightmare Marcus had ever imagined. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they were alive, expanding, contracting, consuming. Marcus's vision blurred. Every sense screamed at him that this was the end. The entity's grin stretched impossibly, filling the room, his mind, his soul. It pressed against him so fully that he could feel the line between himself and the nightmare dissolve. And then the last horrifying truth pierced him. This wasn't just an entity. It was the embodiment of fear itself. And the final grin was the smile of inevitability. Marcus screamed, inside, outside, everywhere. And in that scream, he vanished. The shadows lingered, stretching across the warped apartment, smiling impossibly wide, patient, waiting. Because the hunt never truly ends. And neither does the grin. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Marcus was gone, or at least, that was what it looked like to any casual observer. The walls had settled, the floor appeared solid again, the ceiling ceased its slow, suffocating descent. Shadows no longer twisted wildly across the room. Only the faintest pulse of darkness lingered in the corners, subtle enough to make the hairs on the back of a neck stand on end. The digital clock blinked, 3:27 a.m. The numbers glowed faintly, steady, unassuming, but the silence was deceptive. Marcus had been consumed, yes, but the apartment, his sanctuary, remained alive. It hummed quietly, the remnants of the entity's presence still inside every surface, every shadow, every reflection. A faint whisper drifted, so low it could have been mistaken for the wind. We are still here. The air was cold, damp, and heavy, carrying a lingering weight that pressed on anyone who entered. Marcus's disappearance left no physical trace, no blood, no movement, only the oppressive feeling that someone or something was always watching. Any attempt to rationalize the events failed. Logic, reason, and reality fractured under the horror he had endured. The apartment itself had become a living nightmare, a trap designed not to kill, but to consume perception, to twist reality into a playground of fear. Those who might enter the apartment later would feel it immediately. The subtle, wet weight pressing on their chest, the cold brush against their skin, the sense that something moved just beyond their vision. They would hear faint whispers when the room was quiet, voices too soft to pinpoint but impossible to ignore. And somewhere deep in the corners, the grin remained. Not on a figure, not on a face, but in the very fabric of the apartment itself, stretching infinitely, patient, waiting for the next inhabitant, the next victim to breach its boundaries. For Marcus, there was no return, no escape, no rescue. Only the lingering truth. The entity didn't need to chase. It didn't need to scream or attack. It existed, always, patiently, immortal. And in the silence that followed, the horror continued, unseen but unmistakable. Because some nightmares don't end when you wake. They wait, and they remember. The apartment remained still. To anyone looking, it was normal, a quiet space, untouched by time, with shadows that seemed nothing more than tricks of the light. But Marcus was gone, not in a way that rescue could reach him, not in a way that even death could claim him. He had been absorbed, consumed, rewritten by the entity that had stalked him, learning every heartbeat, every fear, every thought. The air was thick, damp, cold, alive. Even without the lights flickering, the shadows pulsed faintly, breathing in rhythm with some unseen predator. Every reflection in the mirrors carried an extra shimmer of darkness, a suggestion of movement where nothing should have moved. The entity's grin lingered, not on a face, but in the very essence of the apartment, stretching infinitely across walls, floors, ceilings, and even perception itself. A faint whisper reached into the emptiness, barely audible but unmistakable. And now we wait. The horror was complete, but the story didn't end. Anyone stepping inside the apartment afterward would feel it immediately. The subtle, wet pressure against their chest, the faint touch on their neck, the feeling of eyes that didn't exist yet still watched. The darkness would stretch, the whispers would begin, and the apartment would reshape itself around them. The predator didn't need to move. It had learned to be everywhere at once. Marcus's scream, once raw and full of panic, had become part of the space itself, echoing in the corners, feeding the entity's endless patience. Time had lost meaning. Each tick of the clock, every shadow shifting in a peripheral glance, reminded anyone present that reality itself could bend at its will. And somewhere in the deepest, blackest corner beyond sight, the final truth lingered. The entity didn't just feed on fear. It was fear, eternal and patient, hungry and infinite. Marcus had become part of it, dissolved into its very existence. He would never wake, never escape, never even truly die. The apartment waited, the shadows waited, the whispers waited. And for anyone who entered next, the nightmare would begin again. Because some horrors are not contained by time, by space, or by life itself. Some horrors are unending. And the grin would always be there, stretching wide, waiting, patient, eternal. The night had no end, and neither did the terror. Even in the aftermath, the apartment seemed to breathe quietly, as if exhaling the remnants of Marcus's terror. The shadows had settled into a suffocating stillness, but anyone who dared linger could feel them twitching subtly in the corners, alive, patient, waiting. Every surface seemed charged with an unseen awareness, and the air itself carried the faint, wet scent of something impossible. A single beam of moonlight seeped through the cracked blinds, casting a pale, fragile glow across the warped floor. Marcus was gone, but the space he had occupied still resonated with his panic, his fear, his very essence. The entity had consumed him, rewritten him into the nightmare itself, leaving behind echoes that would reach anyone who entered next. The whispers returned, barely audible at first, then rising like a tide, wet and uneven, layering over one another. We are everywhere, we never forget, you belong to us now. The mirror in the hallway rippled faintly, though no wind moved. The reflection it showed was impossibly dark, twisting and stretched in ways the human eye couldn't comprehend. For a fleeting moment, a glimpse of Marcus's own terrified eyes appeared, staring back, not a reflection but a memory trapped inside the mirror, part of the entity now. The apartment itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with the whispers as if alive. Walls throbbed subtly. The floor squelched faintly. The ceiling heaved just enough to make the hair on a visitor's arm stand on end. The shadows weren't aggressive yet. They didn't need to be. Patience was the predator's most dangerous weapon. The digital clock on the wall blinked faintly, 3:28 a.m. Time no longer mattered. Space no longer mattered. The entity didn't hunt. It existed. It waited. It consumed fear slowly, methodically, infinitely. And then a single, final whisper, direct inside the skull of anyone who dared stand in the room. You cannot leave, not truly, and neither will they. The apartment would always remember Marcus. It would always remember the fear he felt, and it would always use it to shape the next victim's nightmare. The shadows remained, grinning impossibly wide. The air remained damp, suffocating, alive. And for a moment, just a flicker in the darkness, the last fragile light revealed the truth. There is no escape, no sanctuary, no safety. Once the entity claims a life, a mind, a space, it never lets go. The nightmare never ends. The apartment waits. The shadows watch. And the grin waits for its next visitor. Eternal, unblinking, infinite. The last light fades. And the terror begins again.